Good morning, students. In today's class, we will discuss about decompression sickness and its management. Decompression sickness is a clinical entity which is experienced by the deep sea divers or the undermine workers while coming out from the depth up to the sea level. So, before discussing the decompression sickness as such, let us have an idea what are the problems of deep sea diving or working at a depth. You can recapitulate from your previous teaching that the problem of high altitude was the rarefaction of air and falling of atmospheric pressure. Though the composition of air remains the same, but the individual partial pressure of different gases gets very much decreased, and which ultimately lead to different clinical scenario over there. On the contrary, for deep sea divers, the situation is just the reverse. Here, the pressure falling over the surface area of the body parts of the divers gets hugely increased with increasing depth. And the estimate of such pressure increase is given in this following box. Here you are seeing that for every 33 feet depth of the sea water, there occurs increase of 1 atmospheric pressure in the surrounding. So, to be precise, a person going at a depth of 33 feet under the sea will experience a total of 2 atmospheric pressure all over his body surface. Accordingly, for every 33 feet, there will be additional 1 atmospheric pressure. But what is the actual problem of this huge pressure falling over the body surface? You all know that in the phase of increasing pressure, the gases behave in certain ways which is governed by 2 physical laws. One is Boyle's law and other is Henry's law. What does Boyle's law tell? Boyle's law tells that when the temperature remains the same, volume of a gas is inversely proportional to the pressure to which it is subjected. That means more is the pressure applied, less will be the volume. So it can be said that in the phase of huge pressure, the gaseous substances present within the body cavity as well as in the surrounding will be hugely compressed in volume. So there will be a tendency for the lung alveoli and all the cavities containing air to get compressed at the depth of the sea. And this increases the work of breathing hugely. And it will be a task for the respiratory system, respiratory muscles to keep the alveoli patent even at the resting stage. This often surpasses the endurance of the respiratory muscles, leading to inevitable collapse of the lung. So this is one of the major problems at the depth of the sea. Another problem is increased solubility of various gases into the blood plasma as well as in other body fluids, which is governed by Henry's law. You all know that this law tells that when the partial pressure of certain gas is increased, the amount of gas getting dissolved into the solution will also increase. As the pressure of the gas above a solution increases, the amount of that gas dissolved in the solution increases. This is actually the Henry's law. And according to this law, in the depth of the sea, when the pressure surrounding pertaining to different gases is grossly increased, the gas that is delivered to the alveoli of course will be increased, and with that high partial pressure, when it is delivered to the pulmonary blood, capillary blood, the huge amount of blood will get dissolved into the blood plasma. Not only in the blood plasma, the lipid soluble gases will get dissolved in huge extent in different lipid contents of the body. And you know, the majority of lipid contents are present in the cell membrane, in the nervous tissue of the brain, in the synovial membrane of the joints, etc. So the gases which are mostly soluble in the lipid will get hugely dissolved in those lipid contents, giving rise to huge amount of that specific gas into those tissues, which may ultimately lead to different kind of narcosis. The maximum extent of such problem is observed with nitrogen. You know, the majority of atmospheric gases is held by nitrogen itself, almost 76%. So, nitrogen, when delivered at a high pressure to the body fluids, being lipid soluble, it gets dissolved in a greater extent in different lipid compartments like brain tissue, cell membrane, synovial membrane of the joints, etc. So the nitrogen content of the body fluids will be hugely increased, and this will lead to a toxic situation called as nitrogen narcosis, which is the major problem of deep sea diving. It may lead to various symptoms, among which the neurological symptoms are the most prominent and even lethal. It may lead to disorientation, irrational behavior, loss of joviality, depression, coma, even death may ensue. So this is nitrogen narcosis. Here is the diagrammatic illustration of how Henry's law operates, increasing partial pressure leading to increased solubility of gases. The concentration of gas per unit volume will be increased. That is Henry's law. Now, if I summarize the problem at the depth of the sea, I can say that potential hazards are: number one, inert gas narcosis that I have just mentioned, due to the increased amount of dissolved gases, mostly nitrogen, and effect of carbon dioxide accumulation, which is not actually due to overproduction or problem of partial pressure. Carbon dioxide production and partial pressure is not at all altered as such like all other gases, as the carbon dioxide partial pressure in the surrounding remains almost negligible. But what happens, from the conventional breathing apparatus, the divers have to take or have to rebreathe the expired air again and again, and this may build up the carbon dioxide content in the blood, giving rise to huge partial pressure. And when the partial pressure of carbon dioxide exceeds 80 mm of mercury in the blood, there develops carbon dioxide narcosis. So this is another problem at the depth of the sea. Oxygen toxicity, which is one of the major problems over there, that is at the depth of the sea in hyperbaric situation. What happens when oxygen is delivered at a very high partial pressure to the alveolus and thereafter to the pulmonary capillary blood? The huge amount of oxygen also gets dissolved into the plasma, but the extraction capacity of the body tissues remaining the same, the majority of oxygen delivered to the tissue remains unutilized, and those hugely unutilized fraction of oxygen will give rise to a number of oxygen free radicals, which are very lethal by nature due to its oxidizing capacity. You may be knowing that molecular oxygen in O2 form is not that damaging by its oxidative nature. The oxidizing capacity is more lethal for the oxygen free radicals which are generated out of this excess molecular oxygen. And these oxygen free radicals include superoxide anions, that is O2 minus anion, peroxide, H2O2 likewise. and these radicals oxidize the cellular components, subcellular organelles like mitochondria, ribosome, cell membrane itself, even the cellular DNA, giving rise to number of clinical scenarios. Oxidative injury. In normal situation, the amount of oxygen free radicals that are generated get optimally scavenged by the antioxidant systems of the body, which include superoxide dismutase, catalase, reduced glutathione, etc. But when the amount of oxygen free radicals generated are hugely increased, our body antioxidant store falls short, and so it is not adequately scavenged, and the oxygen toxicity actually results. So this is another problem of the depth of the sea. And last but not the least is decompression sickness, which is basically a problem during the ascent. It is also called Caisson's disease. Caisson's is basically a pressurized chamber or a cubicle which are meant to lodge the undersea workers, especially the construction work. And pressurized cabin lodging the workers are sent to the depth of the sea, and they work there for hours, and after that they are taken back up to the sea level. Even for the mines, this type of caissons may be used. But what happens, due to sudden deep pressurization at the sea level, the divers or the mine workers often develop different symptom complex which are called decompression sickness. And because of the specific cubicle used, it is also called Caisson's disease. I will show in this presentation the picture of Caisson's. Now in this graph I am showing the Henry's law playing for oxygen. Here are three graphs you are seeing. The topmost one showing the oxygen total content of blood with increasing partial pressure. You are seeing that it is linearly increasing, directly proportional. More is the partial pressure, more will be the total content. And this total content, which is linearly being increased with increasing partial pressure, is not due to oxyhemoglobin content, because hemoglobin has a definite upper limit of holding oxygen. When all the binding sites are saturated, hemoglobin content of blood can no longer hold any further oxygen. But the plasma portion has no limit. With increasing partial pressure, the amount of oxygen dissolved in the plasma gets gradually increased. So partial pressure will lead to increased oxygen content of the plasma. Therefore, the total content will also increase. So in this graph, the lowermost one showing the oxygen dissolved in the plasma, and similarly the uppermost showing the total oxygen content, which is because of the soluble oxygen, but the middle red one showing the oxyhemoglobin content, which has a specific upper limit. This is showing how the oxygen toxicity occurs at the depth. Now, when the decompression actually happens, what are the predisposing factors for decompression to occur? I have already mentioned that decompression is problem of ascent, not a simple ascent. When the person tries to ascend to the sea level very fast ascent, actually the major predisposing factor for sudden decompression. A diver who has to work under the sea for a couple of hours, at least for more than 1 hour, and at least more than 120 feet depth he has gone, and spending there more than 1 hour and ascending very fast, are the major predisposing factor for decompression sickness to occur. Decompression sickness is not only the problem of the deep sea divers, but it can also happen in unpressurized aircrafts at the height, or spacecraft which is suddenly unpressurized. The decompression sickness of similar kind may arise in them also. So, decompression sickness, synonymous with diver's disease or Caisson's disease, also called bends, because of its specific presenting symptom of joint pain and movement, joint pain or pain during movement of the big joints of the body with swelling, redness, etc. Because of this phenomenon, associated. This disease is also popularly known as bends. So whatever the name, decompression sickness, diverse disease or Kaysen's disease is basically the problem arising from the dissolved gases which were there at the depth of the sea because of high partial pressure. Now during ascent, these dissolved gases loses solubility because of lack of partial pressure, because of decompression, and that desolubilized gas which has just lost the solubility comes out in form of bubbles. Initially the bubbles remains very small in size, but gradually they coalesce and form the bigger ones, and that bigger bubbles may block different feeding arteries or capillaries, microcapillaries even, supplying different vital organs, giving rise to specific symptoms. When the feeding artery is supplying the joint spaces, synovial membrane, and the artery is supplying the structures around a major joint, the bends like symptom will appear. That is movement, pain due to movement of the joints. The similar type of pain may arise due to ischemic damage of the organ in the myocardium, giving rise to chest pain, cardiac pain. There may be dyspnea due to blockage of the pulmonary capillaries, jeopardizing the pulmonary gaseous exchange, shortness of breath. This is called chokes. And also there may be cutaneous ischemic damage, giving rise to different type of sensory deficits like paresthesia, feeling of crawling of insects over the skin, along with mottled or marbled appearance over the skin, swelling, pitting edema, etc. All due to blockage of the feeding arteries supplying that specific organ. So these are the symptom complex which are combinedly called decompression sickness. This is the picture of Kaysen. You are seeing the cubicles being sent to the depth of the sea, lodging the workers who will work there for hours, and thereafter when taken back to the sea level, suddenly decompression sickness may happen to them, and because of this specific structure, this disease is also called Kaysen's disease. Now the symptoms of decompression, as I have already mentioned, these are bends which is due to problem of movement of the large joints, elbow, shoulder, hip, wrists. This is due to blockage of the feeding arterioles around the joint spaces. The synovial membrane of the joints contains huge amount of lipid, and therefore nitrogen get dissolved over there, and when the decompression occurs, nitrogen which was dissolved previously tends to come out in form of bubbles, blocking the arterioles in the surrounding joint spaces, and active or passive motion may give rise to excruciating pain. And the pain that arises may be reduced by bending the joint to find a more comfortable position. Whenever this bubbles can be dislodged from the arteriole, the pain may be relieved. If caused by altitude pain, it can occur immediately or after some time, because at the very initial stage the dimension of the bubbles remain very small, but gradually they coalesce to form the bigger ones, which is sufficient to block the arterioles. There may be problem like chokes, which actually means shortness of breath, dry constant cough, and also feeling of pain during respiratory excursion. All these are due to blockage of pulmonary capillary beds by the microbubbles, which affects pulmonary gaseous exchange, and therefore shortness of breath becomes very severe. There may be skin bends or crawls that is paresthesia, numbness, swelling, pitting edema, etc. occurring over the skin due to blockage of the feeding arteries. There may be mottled or marbled appearance over the skin. There may be itching also. These are the cutaneous symptoms. Now, the most devastating ones are the neurologic ones. The neurological symptoms being confusion, memory loss, headache, slurring of speech, blurring of vision. There may be appearance of scotoma in the visual field. There may be unexplained extreme fatigue, behavioral changes, seizures, vertigo, nausea, vomiting, unconsciousness, even coma may occur. There may be affection of the spinal cord due to emerging bubbles. There may be paresthesia, weakness or paralysis of the muscles, girding of abdomen, chest pain. There may be urinary or rectal incontinence. All sorts of neurological symptoms are basically due to excessive bubble formation from different neurons, especially the myelin sheaths, which are huge store of lipid substances where the nitrogen gets to dissolve in excess amount at the depth of the sea, and from where it tends to come out at the sea level in form of bubbles, giving rise to all sorts of symptoms. Now, how to prevent such decompression sickness? The first golden rule to prevent decompression sickness is very slow ascent. If a person goes at a depth of 190 feet and work there for 1 hour, while coming back, he should spend at least 3 hours to cover that distance. And how the time should be lapsed to cover the distance is given in this chart. For 50 feet, he should spend 10 minutes. Then another 40 feet in 17 minutes. At 30 feet, he should spend 19 minutes. And gradually, he should ascend up to the sea level, spending almost 3 hours time to cover that distance. So, slow ascent up to the sea level is the first golden rule to prevent decompression sickness. Next is the provision of scuba or self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. Here in the diagram you are seeing that it is a diagram of scuba where there is presence of 2 cylinders containing air of different kind. The mostly used inhalational air is oxygen helium mixture. Why oxygen helium mixture is given? If normal air is given, nitrogen content becomes very high into that, and nitrogen narcosis is more lethal than helium narcosis. And the solubility of nitrogen is much more than helium. So helium is preferred over nitrogen. Moreover, the density of helium is much less than nitrogen. So with helium, the work of breathing is reduced. And also the bubble formed out of helium is of smaller dimension than the nitrogen bubbles. So helium is less problematic than nitrogen, so it is preferred. And only oxygen is not allowed because of oxygen toxicity. Because of potential hazard of oxygen toxicity, we will use oxygen and helium mixture in this container. Here the air remains in a pressurized way, in a compressed volume, so that huge amount of air can be contained into this small cylinder. And you are seeing there is a valve at the mouth of this container, which is called first stage valve, which is meant to reduce the air pressure, which is going to be taken during inspiration. So before inspiration, actual inspiration process, the pressure will be reduced by this valve. And thereafter with this tubing, the air for inspiration is delivered to the mask from where the person inspires the air, and there is a separate pathway from where the expiratory air is released into the sea. So there is no scope of rebreathing of the expired air. So this is scuba. This should be availed by the divers while going at the depth of the sea. Another measure taken to prevent decompression is to use oxygen and helium mixture in a pressurized cabin for a couple of days before actually going to the sea. If the diver is kept in that situation for couple of days, all the body fluids get saturated with those air mixture beforehand, and it will simulate the scenario where he is going to be placed in coming a few days. So before going actually to the depth of the sea, the divers are kept into this scenario for a few days to saturate all the body fluids with those gases. Now after coming back from the sea, they are also kept in this pressurized cabin for a few days to hours to prevent the occurrence of sudden decompression. Now, after all such preventive precautions, even if a person develops decompression sickness or Caisson's disease, what is to be done with him? He is immediately placed in a recompression tank, which is nothing but a pressurized cabin allowing hyperbaric oxygen you are seeing here. And then and there, in this pressurized cabin, the bubbles already formed get dissolved again, so the symptoms are relieved, and keeping him into that scenario for a few days to hours, the person is gradually decompressed in a strategic way by placing him in different decompression tanks. So immediate recompression followed by gradual decompression is the ultimate treatment for decompression sickness. So this is all about decompression sickness in nutshell. So of what we have learned, that at the depth of the sea, the atmospheric pressure in the surrounding gets excessively increased. For every 33 feet, one additional atmospheric pressure is exerted on the body surface of the person. What is the problem? As per the Boyle's law, the air with this high pressure is delivered to the person's respiratory system. All the air within the body cavity tends to get compressed, so the work of breathing increases. Also, in the phase of high partial pressure of individual gases, they tend to get dissolved in huge extent into the blood plasma and all other body fluids. Nitrogen, being the most disastrous culprit in this regard, gets dissolved into the body fluids like lipids in the neuronal tissues as well as joint spaces, also in the blood plasma, giving rise to nitrogen narcosis at the depth. Also there occurs oxygen toxicity due to excessive liberation of oxygen free radicals, and due to rebreathing of accumulated carbon dioxide, there may be carbon dioxide narcosis also. And when the person tends to come out to the sea level immediately from the depth, there may develop decompression sickness due to formation of bubbles, which is actually due to fall of solubility, due to fall of partial pressure of a specific gas, specifically the nitrogen, and the bubbles formed may block different feeding arteries supplying vital organs, giving rise to different symptoms like bends, chokes, chest pain, crawling over the skin sensation, and neurological symptoms which may be ultimately lethal. For prevention, the first golden rule is very slow ascent and using of scuba at the depth of the sea, and if at all decompression sickness occurs, placing the person immediately in a recompression tank followed by gradual decompression in a strategic way. This is all about decompression sickness. I hope you have understood. If there is any question or query, please let me know in the WhatsApp group. I will try to address all those queries. Thank you all.